Russian President Vladimir Putin is very upset about military losses in Ukraine. Russia's military has suffered significant losses as the invasion attempt in Ukraine enters its 257th day. But in addition to these losses, Russian President Vladimir Putin has suffered a significant loss of face and has been transformed from a leader in the eyes of the world into an occupying leader. The Russian Federation began attacking Ukraine as early as February 2022. But the developments in the last months of the war are more remarkable. Last March, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that they had completed the first phase of their special military operations and were moving on the new phase, the occupation of Donbass. However, Ukraine's counteroffensive, especially in Kharkiv, has brought a completely different dimension to the war. This counteroffensive launched by the Ukrainian army jeopardized the Donbass region, one of Russia's main targets in the war, and ensured that Kharkiv, the second most important city in Ukraine, was cleared of the Russian army in a very short time. The capture of Izium in the Kharkiv region can be characterized as the most strategic territorial loss of the Russians in war, because this city was located at a very key point, both in terms of its location on the Russian-Ukrainian border and in terms of helping Russia to use the border for military deliveries to the Donbass region. The Kharkiv counteroffensive, which paved the way for the war to enter a third phase, was such an unexpected development for the Russians that they had to flee without even taking many ammunition depots and military equipment with them. The military defeat in Kharkiv was most shocking for Russian President Vladimir Putin, sitting in the Kremlin Palace in Moscow. The fleeing retreat of the Russian army has caused both the world and the Russian public to question the military power of the Russians. Putin must have foreseen the weakening of the military power in his army. For a long time he tried to involve Belarus in the war. In fact, these plans of the invader Putin, who planned to attack Ukraine through Belarus, were also disrupted. Belarusian President Lukashenko left Putin alone and decided that Belarus would not help Russia. This decision was met with a great shock in Russia. One of the last hopes of the Russian army, which had fallen on hard times, was that Belarus would get involved in the war and use its borders to help the Russian army. However, a betrayal to Putin, who has been all alone since the beginning of the war, came from the Belarusian president. Russia's military advance is now much slower. In stark contrast to the invading Russian army, the rapid advance of the Ukrainian army in the last few months has surprised not only Putin but also many military experts and observers around the world. The capture of the Kharkiv region has prompted Russian President Vladimir Putin to take different measures. Very senior Russian officials even openly suggested that nuclear weapons could be used. However, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stressed that the Russians were bluffing about the use of nuclear weapons, and Ukraine should continue to support them militarily. The belief that the Ukrainian army can now liberate the occupied Crimea has been engraved in the memory of the Ukrainian people and military. In this process, the significant resistance of the heroic Ukrainian army and the people's refusal to accept the Russian occupation are among the main factors that brought success. But what is more important is that the United States of America has provided the Ukrainian army with high-tech weapons. In Ukraine, it is now possible to talk about a war of technologies as well as armies. Russia, which has suffered significant losses in military equipment, has yet to develop a fully unique defense, especially against Western weapons. Ukraine, on the other hand, has the military technology and experience to destroy Russian missiles, drones, and most importantly, armored vehicles. Ukraine's military technology and experience in warfare have made them an army capable of dealing with a great military power. Russia has repeatedly threatened to use nuclear weapons to break Ukraine's military power. However, experts say that at this point, Kremlin officials have begun to tone down their rhetoric about the use of nuclear weapons. Russian President Vladimir Putin and leading Kremlin officials initially increased their references to the use of nuclear weapons after Putin's annexation speech on November 30th and throughout October. However, according to military experts, Russia used this rhetoric to persuade Ukraine to negotiate and to reduce Western support for Kyiv. The Russian Foreign Ministry also issued a statement on the prevention of nuclear war a few days ago. Experts attribute the change in Russia's rhetoric to the fact that the West and NATO are not reducing their support, because Russia, which has reached the point of military exhaustion, will directly confront the United States and NATO if it uses nuclear weapons. Russia lacks both the military capability and the courage to confront this power. On the front line, Ukrainian forces continue to meet and successfully defend against Russian attacks. The Ukrainian General Staff announced that the Ukrainian army repelled attacks near 8 settlements in the last 24 hours. The Ukrainian army successfully defended Russian offensive operations near 8 settlements in eastern Donbass. Russian occupation attempted to advance towards Yampil, Andriivka, Krasnohorivka, Marinka, Pavlivka, Vodiane, Novomykhailovka in Donetsk region, and the recently liberated town of Bilohorivka in Luhansk region. In this attack attempt, it was learned that the Russians retreated with significant losses. In Luhansk in the Donbass region, where the most violent moments of the war took place, the Ukrainian Air Force struck 7 Russian military positions. Sergei Haidai, the governor of the region, said that the Ukrainian Air Force attacked 7 Russian positions in a difficult situation in the last 24 hours. The Ukrainian military struck and destroyed 6 sites with Russian personnel, weapons, and military equipment, and 1 Russian air defense site in the occupied territory. Explosions were reported in Russian-occupied Donetsk. According to media reports, multiple explosions were heard in Russian-occupied Donetsk. A large fire was reported to have broken out in a railway administration building in Voroslivsky district of Donetsk, but no casualties were reported. As a result of the attacks of the occupying Russian army, 1 person was killed and 5 people were injured in Donetsk region. According to the regional governor Pavlo Krylenko, 1 person was killed in Bakhmut and 5 others were injured in other settlements as a result of the Russian forces' attacks. In the Toretsk district of Donetsk, 1 person was killed as a result of Russian attacks. In the southeastern Zaporizhia region, Russian forces struck a small village with S-300 missile systems. According to Ukrainian officials,